He woke before the bells of the September bled through the fog, long before the fishwives started their low quarrels by the river and the bakers' ovens brutalized the lanes with heat. The forge kept its own hours, and his body kept the forge's, without complaint. He rose like someone lifting a gate off its hinges, slow so nothing scraped, and stood with his feet near the cold hearth to feel the stone and sort himself from the night. In the corner the old bellows wheezed when he shifted them, an old man's lungs, the leather gone gray and cracked at the folds, and the anvil glistened with the film of soot and oil he'd wiped over it last evening with the heel of his hand. He liked to know by sight and touch that nothing had been moved while he slept. Thieves were clever with locks. Fire was cleverer. Rust was a thief and a fire both, if you left it to work. He laid the kindling like bones under the coal, struck sparks until they lived and multiplied, then breathed the first heat into the day with the bellows. Orange crept under black. Smoke licked the throat of the chimney and coughed out into the lane, where the fog ate it like soup. He drank water warm from a clay jar and felt his jaw loosen. He had not shaved in a few days. It made him look older, he thought, and sometimes the gold cloaks looked longer at a bearded man who didn't carry a sword than at a smooth-cheeked boy who did. The iron first, always the iron. Nails, hinges, the petty, gutwork pieces the city swallowed whole and forgot. He set the bar into the coals and watched its skin go from smoke to red, the way a man's ears go when he's caught at a lie. He pulled and struck, the iron muttering at every blow, a language he understood better than small talk. The hammer face kissed the metal's length in even steps. He turned it in the tongs, watched for the line between pliant and soft, dipped and hissed and pulled it again, working and working until his shoulder warmed and his mind, which usually kept time by the beat of a hammer, slowed into that blankness the old masters prized. The bellows, his breath, the hammer, the iron, all the city was a storm around those four old friends and couldn't touch them so long as they held to one another. When a boy came with a bucket of brine and a bundle of broken nails, he didn't look up until the hammering gave him a place to stop. The boy hovered with a nervous, pinched grin, teeth white as shells. His hair curled like a lamb's, and he had one of those faces that always looked apologetic. "You again," Gendry said. "You grind them with your teeth for supper?" The boy laughed too much at that. "The wharf planks chew nails like they was rye," he said. "Master Hart says he won't pay for new without old to show for it." Master Hart, the miser who ran rope from the river to the King's Road as if he owned both. Gendry took the bundle and poured their iron clink into a basin. "You'd do better bringing entire planks then," he said. "I'll melt these into something that won't fall out when a fart walks past." He set them alongside the bar and put in another shovel of coal. "Tomorrow, if your master wants it sooner, he can haul his arse here and warm his hands with the rest of us." The boy's gaze skittered around the forge. People stared at the big tools, always. The long-handled tongs like insect legs, the scythes and clouts, the nails bristling like a hedgehog in their boxes, rows and rows, deadly only because of how many there were. The boy's eyes paused by the thing covered with canvas on a bench, a man's masked shape that took the shadow oddly. "Don't touch," Gendry said, and the boy's eyes darted to his face and then down. "Show me your hands." The boy held them out. Young hands, skinned knuckles, nails bitten to nothing, one palm scarred with an old burn. "You're learning to avoid the hot end," Gendry said. He angled his head. "You got a name?" "Tom," the boy said, as boys did. Tom was safe. Tom gave away nothing. "Tommy." He rubbed the burn. "I ain't going to steal, master." "Don't call me master," Gendry said, too quickly. He cooled his voice. "There's nothing in this place worth stealing if you don't know what to do with it after." The boy's eyes flicked to the covered thing again and away like a fish. "I'll tell Master Hart," he said. "Tomorrow then." "Thank you." He went out with the pail, and the fog swallowed him in a few steps as if the lane itself had decided to keep him. Gendry stood with his hand on the bellows handle and felt the small jar of heat the forge had cast into the morning. It made him think of other mornings. Heat hung around memories, like smoke around an old cloak. He pulled back the canvas with the tenderness he saved for tools. The bull's helm stared from the bench with blind assurance. It was ugly as a baby when you first looked at it. Blunt nose, wide brow, horns like half moons. but it sat a face well when it sat, and he'd fitted the inside with leather that didn't bite. He had made it years ago, when he thought a man's head needed a mask to announce itself to the world, before he learned other masks fit closer and came off harder. He ran his hand over a horn's curve, pride quickening and slipping away like a fish again. Pride was a poor breakfast. It made the day sit wrong in the belly. Tobo Mott had not liked the helm when it was new. He'd said it impressed boys and gave poor balance. That had been one of the last things the man had said to him before sending him away with a purse and a look that meant "You're too tall for my doorway now." Mott had been a good master, strict the way a bell was strict, always telling you the hour. Gendry could almost hear him now, recounting the weight of a true blade, the way a hinge should whisper when it swung right. He hung the canvas back just as a shape blocked the light in the doorway. He knew the silhouette by the lift of the shoulder. Men with swords showed their weapons even at rest. Seeing T. Hem stand got your eye ready. The man with him was wrapped in a brown cloak and had the limp patience of someone with nothing but time. Both smelled of road. "You Gendry?" the sword man asked. He had one of those faces that narrowed and then widened again with suspicion, like a hawk's. The other man's had stayed low over his face. The sword's voice had the sand of the stepstones in it. "Ships and far places. Depends on who's asking," Gendry said. He kept his hand near nothing. Only fools kept their hands near hammers when swordsmen breathed on them. "I am," the other man said quietly, and tugged back his hood. Gray hair cut short to keep out rope and weather. A face built by salt and obstinacy. Eyes that didn't look away even when that would make life easier. He looked like a man who had leaned into a hard wind his whole life and found it a friend by necessity. Gendry knew him then. The face had been described, ill and well, in taverns all along the river, but it wasn't the stories that told him. It was the way the man held his mouth when he saw the forge, some mixture of relief and disbelief that metal could have anything to say to the sea. "You're Davos," Gendry said. The sword man snorted in surprise. "He is," he said, "and I am very tired." Davos stood with his hand tucked into his cloak as if it was cold. He wasn't a big man. Men expected kings' hands to be bigger, Gendry knew, and they expected smugness and jewels. The only thing shiny about Davos was the scar at his mouth, and even that was dull with age. "We came to talk," Davos said. The bellows gave a small, itchy rasp as the fire breathed and settled. "If you'll let us." Gendry glanced at the street. The fog was thinner now, and day made its claim. The city was beginning to speak to itself. "If you're selling salvation, try 3 doors down," he said. "The septon there will mend your soul for a copper, and talk is free." Davos took the jest as if it had been a handshake. "My soul's got enough patches," he said. He looked at the anvil. "This place is a good room for truth. The iron calls out a lie like a bell." "If you've come to call me a liar," Gendry said, "you can do it outside and save me sweeping." "We've come," said the swordsman, "because men kill for less than the truth, and we've both seen too much of that. I'm Ser Harlan Pym, by the by." Ser Harlan looked like a man who had been 2 or 3 different kinds of not knight before he found a title to fit him. Gendry nodded. "Close the door then," he said, and Ser Harlan did. They stood there, 3 men in the forge's small universe, and listened to the way the city waited outside a door. Gendry didn't like the look of Ser Harlan's sword. A plain thing made for work, not for ceremony. He liked Davos's quiet even less, because he couldn't tell if it came from hard choices or from having run out of choices. "What do you want?" he said finally. Davos reached into his cloak and took out a bundle wrapped in oilcloth. He handled it with that odd thrift men have when they have lost much. He laid it on the bench where Gendry had written down orders and counted copper on market days. "Read?" Davos asked. Gendry shook his head. "No." "Good," Davos said, like someone had spared him a chore. He undid the twine and peeled the oilcloth back. Inside lay a thick wad of parchments, long and narrow, as if someone had stretched words like rope and wound them around a man's throat to see if he'd choke. The topmost was sealed with a round blob of black wax, stamped with a crowned stag so clumsily cast it might have been bitten rather than pressed. It looked like a child's drawing of a thing he'd seen only once. Gendry felt the stupid leap in his chest and told himself sternly it was only wax and someone's pricked thumb. He had lived too long to trust pictures. "What is it?" he asked. "A will," Davos said, "and letters of witness." The way he said the words made them common, like flour and salt. He put his good hand flat on the parchment and then drew it away, as if reluctant to leave prints. "Signed by a king, countersigned by 3 lords, a maester and a septon. One of them dead when it was written, 2 since. The others have less use for it than they should." "A king," Gendry said, and without meaning to he looked at the covered shape on his bench as if it might nod. "There's been too many kings lately to know what you mean." Davos's mouth twitched. A fair point. The man who wrote this wore no crown when he did. He had more right to it than most who donned one. He named himself king because the law told him he was, and the law's an old, tired mule. But sometimes you can still ride it away. "I'm a smith," Gendry said. "You start talking mules, I'll ask what you want shod." "That is what I want shod," Davos said, soft as if the words might break. "The law, and you." Gendry laughed then, because not laughing would have been a lie, and in his shop he tried not to lie. The laugh sounded like a cough. "You're the first man to look at me and see a law," he said. "I see a lad who looks like a man I served," Davos said, and he did not flinch at the hurt that made. "When I first saw you, you were younger, clean-faced, and your hammer arm didn't have that roll to it yet. I saw you then and thought, God's help us, there's the king again come back as a boy. Not blood, not lawful, just the face. Since then there's been time, and news, and too many dead. I had a ship once, and I had a boy once, and I've had a belly full of failure. So I came to put this in your hand, because it says what it says, and if the men who should read it won't, someone without much to lose should." "It says what?" Gendry asked. "That all the acknowledged natural issue of King Robert Baratheon are to be gathered, guarded. And, this word is ugly, but the law loves ugly words, legitimated," Davos said. He put his thumb on the seal. "By him, in anticipation of his death, ratified by a great council, called with due writ. He wrote these letters and charged witnesses because the law is a mule, and mules won't walk without a stick. He named them by name where he could. He described what he remembered when he couldn't. He asked that they be brought under the stag's antlers rather than left to be hunted like hares." Gendry's palms went slick. The forge's heat hadn't changed. The room had. He took a step back because closer made it worse. The words slammed into him with the dull persistence the hammer had been using a moment before. "You're lying," he said, because stubborn was a shield. Robert Baratheon couldn't read, and he couldn't write sober. Davos gave the small smile of a man who has the bad habit of loving the truth even when it makes a fool of you. "So they say," he replied, and so it was. But this wasn't his hand. He dictated it to a hand that could. He had the sense to know what he couldn't do. He had the weakness to not do many things he could. He asked me to carry these once when I thought I would die at sea. I didn't. I carried them across rocks in winter and pride. Pages travel lighter than men. You expect me to take this to the gatehouse and knock," Gendry said. He swallowed and wished water had more to say. "You expect the Goldcloaks to congratulate me for having the right jaw and give me a dais. I expect," Davos said, "that men who profit by confusion will do what they always do when someone brings a measure. But I don't expect you to go alone, and I don't expect you to go ignorant. I came because a law exists, not a rumor. There is a way for a bastard to be made lawful besides a king or queen's out-of-bed grace. The lords can speak together and make law stand up straight instead of slouch. They did it when princes quarreled and dragons still flew. They did it when we had more sense than swords. Great councils," Ser Harlan said, as if the words were a cud that had lost all flavor in his mouth. "Old men talking while young men die. I'm young and I've died enough," Davos said shortly. He looked back to Gendry. "I want a piece of iron made into a plow boy. I have the ore, poor as it is. You are the fire." Gendry's throat felt tight. He should have thrown these men out. He should have told them that the bull's helm was a boy's fancy and that he had learned not to get soft over a seal or a story. Instead, he went to the bench and took up the top parchment as if it might kick. The wax was cool. When he turned it over, the underside showed a print of the signet's face softened by heat. The crowned stag, antlers spread, inside a halo of thumb lines. "My mother," he said slowly, and the words felt like someone else's, someone who could put names to softness without flinching. "Told me once a big man bought her blue shoes and put a coin on the dresser with a stag on it. She told me not to get ideas. She said shoes break no matter who buys them. She said I had his black hair and he had the habit of not staying, and she thanked the gods I had one without the other. She worked at an alehouse that changed names with the season. I put the coin in the fire when I was old enough to be angry. I watched the stag blur, and I thought that was clever." He put the parchment down like it weighed a hammer's head. "That's what the shape of a thing is worth to me, Onion Knight." Davos took that in without stepping back. "Blue shoes," he murmured. "God save us." He would buy a woman shoes and a whore a song. His voice went bitter with affection. He was a great man the way a storm is great. Glorious if you are far enough away. Deadly if you are not. I loved him like a fool and hated him a little for how easy he made it. 20 years was hunger for him. There are men who think that means a belly in every port. They forget what else hunger eats. The fire made a long, lazy sigh and shed a coal. Gendry reached for his tongs and pushed it back. Sudden need to adjust that small wrongness before it became a larger one. He drank again. The water was warm and tasted faintly of iron, which was better than tasting of rats. "What would you have me do?" he said, still turned to the hearth. "If I were the iron you want, what shape?" "Gather them first," Davos said. "The living. There were more once. The city ate some. War ate more. Someone with a high bed and a better robe put out meat for the dogs with some of them if rumors aren't lies. And rumors are rarely born of nothing. The paper says a few names. Some we know without paper. There's a girl in the Vale, a stone girl, who runs on mountain paths like a goat. There's a boy called Edric by the sea who was once at Storm's End, and then in foreign houses with tutors and soft bread. There are others girls no one would count if the counting comes hard. Boys no one taught to count." His voice lowered, and Gendry had to lean an inch to hear. "There was a babe here. There was a time when men were paid to find and bury. We can't name bones. So we gather the breathers, as the law says. The letters call it a claim, but in truth it is a shelter. Pull them in. Put them under a sign any fool can see. Then ask for talk. Ask." Ser Harlan said, amusement broken like a bad tooth. "You'll ask and lords will give? The very asking is law," Davos said. "If enough men stand about and hear such a request in the right chamber, if the faith nods and the right quills scratch, a great council can be called. And if one is called, a question can be put. If that question is answered the right way, the bastard becomes bred. He becomes not a bastard. The right to sit on a chair is another question. And if it's not asked or it's answered wrongly, we've still won the first. Your father." He jerked his chin toward Gendry as if the word itself could draw blood. "Loved giving honors he didn't think through. We will give prudence here. We will hand the law a shape slowly, so it can't bite our fingers." Gendry thought of the blue shoes and his mother's laugh when she cribbed them, the way she'd told the story as if it were a jest and not a miracle, lifting her skirt a hand's breadth off the filth in pride. He thought of boys around his fire and girls yesterday in the market, hair shoved under caps, and that something in him that had always been hard and solitary like an anvil shifted. His life had been manageable because it was small. Men who worked for a living learned to keep a life small. Small things ate less, died quieter, called less attention from men with ledgers and swords. The law was not small. It filled rooms with men and words until no one could breathe for it. It was an anvil big as a ship. He touched the seal again. "And if they legitimize us," he said. "What then?" "Then," Davos said, "all of Robert's get her set on a level plank. Then a man with half a mind can plank on plank it to a throne if gods or men wish it. That may be a second council. It may be something harder, like living in a way that makes it inevitable. Or it may be a thing we put aside if it is wiser. But first, shelter. Law first. Claim the living the city forgot." Gendry set his jaw. "Why me? You've just named others with softer hands. Boys taught to bow and girls taught to step without tripping over silk. If the law must choose one to be stand-in for all, why the one with no book or curtsy? Because I look like him? Half the city looked like him. Once he went through it with his breeches not tied. Davos's mouth moved as if he held back words and snipped off only the ones that did the job. Because you won't steal from them, he said. Because you won't spend lives to get yourself one. Because a man who knows iron doesn't ask it to be what it's not and doesn't lie to it about what it is. I can teach you to read. Harlan can teach you to hold. Others can teach you what forks are for and which men are snakes. No man can teach a snake to be indifferent to a purse. The law is a mule, boy. It will bear better with a patient hand. And the small folk will watch your hands to see if they know them. Gendry looked at his palms again. Nicked, hard, webbed with burns that had never bothered to heal pretty. He could put them on a newborn's head and feel the fontanelle jump. He could hold a blade in tongs until it sang. He could crack a rib if he struck a man wrong. He could lift a barrel in each hand when he had to and leave no evidence but the ache the next day. Tomorrow, he said finally, and the word tasted like the city's morning, damp, cold, impossible to avoid. Bring me the names. I'll make a list even if I can't read it. Bring me the man with the quill who writes for the viceroy of the law. We'll make him write without flattery and make him teach me what I'm signing, so I don't put my mark on a letter that says I owe 1,000 dragons due on the Feast of Never. Bring me this will. I'll keep it where thieves don't look. Ser Harlan eyed the forge. Where's that? He asked, skeptical as only a man paid to doubt could be. In plain sight, Gendry said. Under a hammer. When they left, he stood in the doorway and watched their backs until they had become men among men again. The city was fully awake, and it threw itself against the day with the heartless energy of hunger. Sellers sang. A woman sweated her way up the lane with a rag bucket and a scowl that could poison a cistern. Two men laughed and did not quite pretend to be sober. Above, the great September spells at last rang, and pious ants began their march to pray for weather or justice, knowing full well one was more likely than the other. A little afterward, the septon with the shop 3 doors down came to order nails. He had hands like roots, and when he lifted his sleeve to count coins, a scar like a sickle showed on his forearm. Brother Cole, he introduced himself, again, though Gendry had known his name 6 months. For the pew slats, if you put in good nails, men won't fall asleep in prayer. If the gods were cruel, they'd make the benches fall to wake them. Gendry counted iron. If the benches fell, he said, you'd need twice as many nails next week. Pray for that. The septon smiled, the particular smile men of robes used when they wanted a joke to leave no bruise. He watched Gendry's face the way a man watches a wall to see if it will hold a shelf. You look strained, he said. I was born with a brow, Gendry replied. It is something to put sweat under. Brother Cole set a copper star at the edge of the anvil and then moved it away, as if the iron might bite it. He studied the canvas-shrouded shape and then the seals around the room with a curiosity too frank to be only nosy. Storm in the air, he said mildly, as if naming weather could make it move elsewhere. I'm collecting pins for a veil and for a roof. The first to keep wind off the gods. The second to keep rain off the poor. Which is more valuable? Roofs, Gendry said. No offense to your gods. None taken, Cole said at once. He watched the bellows. I don't trust men who speak offense and then pay it interest with none taken. It's an accounting trick. He had a way of looking and not looking that made you see him less as a man and more as a habit in a room. He lifted his eyes to Gendry. Do a kindness if you can, he said quietly, and the words surprised Gendry in how much they sounded like his mother's, who had believed kindnesses were bargains with a world determined to cheat you. People with law on their side are coming and going today, Cole added, as if that were a weather report too. Some are the benevolent kind. Some will put out a man's candle to save oil. Watch your flame. When he had gone, Gendry put the sealed parchment in a trough under his bench where he kept slag and the small, ugly parts that hid in plain sight. Then he pulled the canvas taut over the bull's head and bound it again with the twine. Then he let the fire do what it would do, because no matter what men wrote or swore, the day had nails to be and out and hinges to hang. It was later, after he had burned his wrist reaching for a strip too eager to pretend at being a blade, that the first gold cloak came in on the smell of heat and glanced around like a housewife judging dirt. He was not the kind of gold cloak Gendry respected. Not the kind who earned his pay in bruises on alleys and made jokes between mouthfuls of blood. He was scrubbed. He had neat hair and a clean jaw and the habit of expecting to sit when he wanted to and for someone to give him food without asking what coin he had. He stood with a hand on the pommel of a sword like it was a promise. "You the smith," he said. His eyes were small and pale. He had a lord's mouth on a common jaw, mean even at rest. "Usually," Gendry said, not looking up from the anvil. He finished the rivet head and then turned it, because nothing made iron sulk like stopping to scratch when it needed turning. The gold cloak waited with the affronted patience of a man who had never been asked to wait. "You fixed Janoslin's hinge last year," he said. "The one on his pantry." He said it swung too quiet. Gendry dipped the steel. The hiss filled the space where an answer could have fit. "A hinge that squeaks announces thieves," Gendry said. "A hinge that whispers announces hungers." I fixed what he asked. The gold cloak moved further into the shop, curiosity making him careless. "You make helms?" He nodded at the covered shape. "I make what men pay me for," Gendry said. "Which are you, man or pay?" The gold cloak snorted. "There's talk you've been seen by men of a certain house this morning," he said, falsely offhand. "Talk of a parchment and a seal and big ideas in a small room. Talk like that makes men like me thirsty. For wine or coin, whichever is easiest." Gendry set down tongs and hammer. He turned to him. The man had a neckerchief neat at his throat that a woman had probably tied. It irritated Gendry in a way that seemed unworthy and made him want to be cruel about it. "You thirsty?" he said. "Get a cup at the Mermaid. Tell them you know someone with blue shoes. They'll give you something to tell later to folk who want to hear stories. If you came to arrest me, do it. If you came to warn me, I am warned. If you came to ask for coins, I'll pay for the nails you carry in your armor if you can find them." The gold cloak's eyes narrowed. He tapped his belt, a habit men have when they want to appear like a dog checking his collar. For a second, a mean little plan moved behind his gaze like a fish through weeds. Then he decided a smith's pity wasn't worth the bruise it cost, and he made a noise that was meant to remind Gendry he had friends who'd come back if he whistled. "We're watching," he said. "Who isn't?" Gendry replied, and the man left, smelling faintly of spice. When he was gone, Gendry cursed quietly at his own heart for how hard it had beat for that ordinary nothing. On the way to the river that afternoon with the nails promised, he decided to take a long way rather than cut through the lane where he had once been a boy. The day had burned off its fog and wanted only to be cold and honest about it. Children played in the mews with a rope tied to a dog who was playing a different game entirely. A man with a drum tried to sell miracles in a voice that would have made a decent chantler, and a woman told fortunes so plainly that Gendry smiled. "You'll live?" she told a girl. "You'll die?" she told a boy. "You'll eat?" she told a man with a full belly. She was not wrong. She was not paid. At the river, the ropes lay fat and wet and the barges shouldered each other like oxen. A crane creaked as if it had slept poorly. The water looked like slate and smelled of iron and fish guts and proven guilt. He handed over the nails to Master Hart, who counted them with pious care and refused to look at him until the last was in the last slot. People made certain tasks into ceremonies when they wanted to pretend they had control. "More tomorrow," Hart said. "Bigger nails tomorrow," Gendry said. "If you want planks to hold when men dance." "Men don't dance on my planks," Hart said with wounded dignity, which made Gendry laugh outright. On the way back, he stopped in a baker's shop because the smell made his stomach sound like his bellows. The woman behind the counter had arms like columns and a face that had learned to be beautiful through competence. Flour dusted her hair like early snow. He knew her as Nella, though she had probably reintroduced herself to him half a dozen times in a half-dozen ways. The city changed names the way children changed games and wondered at their elders' reluctance. "You put too much heat in your day again," Nella said, handing him a heel of bread without counting it on the scale. She always gave him ends. He didn't complain. Crust was the anvil of bread. "Heat doesn't finish by itself," he said. "Are you scarce on yeast?" "Scarce on peace," she replied, matter of fact. "Yeast minds its own business. Men don't." She tilted her chin at his brow. "You look like you looked when you were 15 and thought beating iron would make you taller." It did, he said. It did the beating, she said dryly. Take a roll for later. You eat like a dog, twice as much as you think you do, and at the worst times. She wrapped 2 little dark loaves in a cloth she would never see again, and he remembered to press 2 coppers into her hand. Keep it, she said, tucking one back in his palm. I mean it. Times are going to ask more than coins of you, Gendry. You'll be paying with sleep soon. Buy yourself a blanket. I have a blanket. Then buy yourself a second to give away. She looked around as if the walls might overhear cliché and be bored, then leaned and spoke low. Don't let men with swords tell you what the law is. They've made enough law with steel. If paper and prayers are going to help you, go to the men who wear gray and the men who wear brown, not the ones who we are red, and get someone with a decent pen, not the kind who believes ink makes him a lord. He was about to say he didn't know what she meant when a child slipped in under his elbow like a fish darting for a shadow. He felt the little body before he saw the face. Thin, quick, eyes too old. A girl? A boy? The city's children came in 2 kinds, seen and taken, and this one had survived by being both and neither. You're the bull, the child said in a voice made for running. They call you that in the pots. They say you bang your head against things until they go your way. Who says that? Gendry asked, not kindly, because children like that could be the city's tongue as used by men in quiet rooms. My aunt, the child said, which could have meant any woman who had given the child food twice, and a singer who has one eye. He said it like he loved you. He says you should wear your helm again and let it lead the way. He says, what do you want? Nella cut in, with a weary practice that suggested she threw more children out than loaves. We sell bread here, not lies. The child's jaw worked as if chewing hunger. They killed the girl by the weir in Flea Bottom last night, the child said. The words came too fast, as if they had waited in a narrow place and now stumbled over each other into the open. The brown-haired one with the dimples, the men in gold. They took her away the day before alive. She scratched one of them. She said to tell the bull he couldn't fix everything. She said to tell him he ought to stop trying, because it would break him. And she laughed like a bird. And now she has a sack around her head and no eyes. The child gulped air like water. She said to tell you her shoes pinched. Gendry was aware his hands had curled into fists with a mind of their own. He uncurled them with care. What was her name? He asked. The child blinked. Names were a kind of magic people lied about more than they lied about moons. Rennie, the child said. She sold apples. She wasn't another kind of seller, no matter what they say. She was a good girl. Go, Nella said, abrupt. Go and tell that to 3 people who will not sell it again. The child fled. The door slapped its frame. Nella slid him the wrapped loaves as if they were weapons he had paid for. The city is going to remember you, she said, simple. Make it remember you for the right thing. What right thing is that? He asked, but she was already turning to shout at a man who tried to pocket a biscuit. Back at the forge, Davos and Ser Harlan were waiting. Men popped out of the city like oysters. You needed to be careful of where you stepped. Davos had brought with him a man in gray with ink on his second finger and a way of standing that told you he believed he understood order and loved it for making fools of chaos. He introduced himself as Orwyle, with a slight bow that somehow counted you at once and found you wanting and yet forgave you for it. I will act as Scrivener, he said. My hand won't shame your cause. What cause? Gendry asked, a reflex, and Orwyle tilted his head as if to say the obvious didn't need affirmation to live. We begin with a list, Davos said, in that practical tone that brooked no dramatics. He laid a chalk on the bench and Orwyle cleared a patch and wet his quill and looked around for a chair he could deny himself because it would make his dignity stronger. Names we know and suspect. Then we write a petition to the High Septon to convene inquiry in the Hall of Lamps. Then we ask 3 houses to send reliable men to listen, not as lords who own anything, but as lieges called by the faith. Then we rope the city watch's conscience and drag it in, kicking. Which 3 houses? Gendry asked. He drew a long breath that smelled of coal and bread and river. The city's trinity. House Royce? Davos said without hesitation. The old bronze law, They'll fancy themselves virtuous and will help for the sake of the story they can tell after. House Tarly, he added with a heavier face. They'll scowl and find the holes and plug them with hard questions and call us fools for needing the holes named. And House Celtigar, he finished. For the old legalry, they count coins by reading them and don't like men who spend other men's inheritance with a sword. If we can bring a high tower in, all the better. But that light is a long way off. Royce will come if Royce is bored, Orwell sniffed. Tarly will come if he can make someone cry. Celtigar will come if he thinks he can sell parchment when we're done. The High Tower will watch first to see whether he wants to pretend he was coming all along. Gendry felt something like a laugh flicker and die. It wasn't mirth. It was recognition. You all talk like a butcher telling me how to cut a pig. Better that than like a pig telling a butcher where to stand, Ser Harlan said. Orwyle set his quill. Names, he said briskly, like a mother calling children. As if names would behave because he'd said so. Say them. Maya Stone, Davos said. The Vale. Squire's tales have it that she rides a mule up paths that make men piss. Her mother was of a minor house. Service to Lord John Arryn's kin once. There are men at the Eyrie who remember, unless the last year has eaten their memories whole. Maya Stone, Orwell wrote, and the ink made two neat words that gave Gendry a strange comfort. Ink stayed, if you dried it right. Iron rusted if you didn't tend it. He had never loved the written the way men in grey loved it. Now it felt like a nail. Edric Storm, Davos said. Storm's end. Then Lys. Then, he looked at Gendry, at the easy, unclaimed face that looked like trouble to the wrong people. He had a good tutor, and a little vanity, and a heart that wants to stand on something that won't wobble. If his feet are on foreigners' marble, he'll call it home until he sees familiar dirt. He will be vain enough to want to be seen in this. Edric Storm, Orwell wrote. Storm first, then blue water, then, if we must, return. He licked his finger and dabbed at a blot, pleased with himself. Bella, Ser Harlan said. Stony September. I drunk away 3 summers there once and left most of the sense I had in a ditch. An innkeeper's girl. The old stories hang around her like smell around fish. She's always been taller in men's minds than in life. Bella of Stony September, Orwell wrote with faint disapproval of the of. She'll need protection from stories if she's to tell one of her own. Davos hesitated. Bara, he said gently, and the gray man's hand twitched. We don't write it, Davos amended at once. She is bone now or belief. There's no use naming what's not for calling. We will only take into the thing those we can carry. Garen's Bay has 2, Ser Harlan contributed, surprising Gendry, who had put him in the ledger labeled swords. A boy with hands like yours, big-knuckled and clumsy but kind. A girl who sings in the kitchen when she thinks no one hears. A sailor's child and a cook's. He knocked masts and made music indiscriminately. Your father. Names, Orwell prompted. Not poetry. Rook, Ser Harlan said grudgingly. Sana, Orwell wrote, and the names got their small, momentary immortality. Gendry found himself breathing more evenly with each scratch. It wasn't hope. It was engagement. It felt like fitting a blade to a hilt and feeling it seep. More, Orwell said. Maya, Davos repeated, though Orwell had already written her. Edric, Bella, Rook, Sana. There was a kitchen boy called Ham in Lord Rowan's service who smiled like a saint and worked like an ox. He went to war. He did not come back. If he did, he is a baker by now. We won't write him. We will find others. The trouble with men like Robert is they didn't keep receipts. They worked until the light in the forge shifted to that weary angle that made all work feel like a moral failing. Orwell's fingers blackened. Davos paced a line into the floor that Gendry would find the next morning and wonder at. Ser Harlan went to the door twice and stood like a statue of suspicion, and once came back brisk and low to say a gold cloak had walked past and did not look in, and that was more dangerous than if he had. They ate Nella's bread without ceremony and drank small beer that made Gendry remember his mother's laughter again. He wished sometimes he had less memory. He wished sometimes he had more. When the light was thin and the first throes of evening made the sky seem like a finished blade with oil on it. Brother Cole came again and stood without saying anything until he had been there long enough that you couldn't ignore him without admitting discourtesy. He held his hands the way men do when they have news. "There's a man," he said, "quiet and wrong, like a wheel with a nail in it. He was asking in the Hall of Lamps how much it costs to have a petition burned as blasphemy. He thought he might pay in candles. The fat silly was sharper and he knew. He has the smell of spice and clean linen. If he's one of yours, he's overeager." "We don't have men yet," Davos said. "We have a fool's map and a stubbornness." "Good," Brother Cole said, with genuine pleasure. "Fool's maps mark dragons. Other men's maps pretend there aren't any." His eyes twinkled at his own impudence. "The High Septon, the new one, the one without rings for fingers, likes fools. He knows a few of the right kind when he sees them. He doesn't like men who smell like spice. He once told me that if the gods had wanted cinnamon in their incense, they'd have put trees in the September. He asked me to watch your door, not to keep men out, just to see whether the wind blows one way or another while you talk." Davos bowed slightly to that. "We will bring our paper to the September tomorrow," he said. "We will ask for a hearing of witness and a list of names to be taken. Not for the throne. We'll leave talk of chairs to men who like sitting." "Good," Cole said again. "Chairs break more backs than beds." He turned his head to Gendry and looked at him for a long blink. "I have a hammer," he said to him. "You're not the only one. Mine is quieter. I call it homily. If you need it, it's yours." Gendry found that he wanted, suddenly and absurdly, to have someone older than him put a hand on his head the way mothers do in markets to count their children. He settled for nodding at a stranger's kindness. "I'll try not to break it," he said. When the door had been closed and barred, when Orwell had packed his indignantly organized satchel, when Davos had wrapped the parchments in oilcloth and placed them under the anvil with a seriousness that would have made Gendry laugh at any other time, when Ser Harlan had taken the stool by the cold hearth and told them he would sleep upright because sitters wake quicker than liars, Gendry finally lay on the narrow pallet in the corner and looked at the rafters as if they could tell him a story. He did not sleep. He counted breaths. He thought of iron's colors as it warms. His heart did not settle under his ribs as it ought to have. He was 30 and felt 9 and felt 100. He caught himself grinning without humor into the dark. The city mattered in a way it had never done before. It made you spooked and grand at the same time, like standing at the top of a bell tower and hearing the air move. When he slept, he dreamed of a mule with a crown that kept slipping down over its eyes, and of a man with blue shoes who walked down a street without noticing that the cobbles softened and glittered wherever he had stepped as if he had spilled coin there. He woke sweating at the sound of a cock that did not exist in his neighborhoods and reached for the hammer under his pallet that very much did. Morning came gray and practical. Men who had shouted the previous night about their bravery came to buy nails to keep their roofs from blowing off. The first man who said the word king had it stuck in his throat by the look-say. Our Harlan gave him. The second got it out anyway. Gendry watched the word leave the man's lips as if it were a moth. He felt it beat its powder at the air and wondered whether moths ever envied flames. They walked to the September together, 3 men and a paper and whatever ghosts cared to attend. The city opened its doors to them the way it opens doors to all. Reluctantly and with purpose. Beggars stared and blessed. Buyers argued about beans. A child in a doorway stood with his finger deep in his nose and then smiled when Gendry smiled back, shy triumph on his face. It put a brash comfort in him he did not trust. He would not, he decided, think about kingship at all. There were other words to swallow first without choking. Shelter, legitimation, witness, bread. The great September was white as bone where it had been cleaned, and soot-colored where pigeons had not respected sanctity. Its doors stood open and made a mouth of darkness, inside which men's voices were swallowed and then spat back out softer. Brother Cole met them where the light and shadow argued and led them inside with the comfortable ease of a man used to being where other men put their secrets. Lamps swung, very gently, as if moved by the breath of prayers. The High Septon was not who Gendry expected. He was not fat. He was not jeweled. He had a tiredness that read as health, the kind of health you earn by walking every day until your joints divorce you amicably. He wore brown under white and smiled in a way that told you he knew exactly how that looked on him and had no patience to preen. His eyes were sharp and had very little patience to play. Brother Cole bowed to him, and the High Septon ignored it to clasp the man's shoulder as if he were acknowledging a shared theft. "These are the ones," Cole said simply, and the High Septon turned his head slightly to Davos, then to Gendry, and then finally to Ser Harlan, whose posture said he would rather be set on fire than in a church. The High Septon looked lingeringly at Gendry's hands. "Those hands have never left work unfinished," he said, approvingly. He gestured to a chamber off the main hall where lamps were fewer and voices went to die. "Come." They sat with a table between them that had seen men carve their names into it when they were young and run their fingers over the grooves when they were old. Davos unwrapped the oilcloth like a mother with a swaddling. Orwyle cleared his throat and produced the petition like a conjurer. The High Septon took both and did not read either immediately. He looked instead at Gendry until the man felt a fool for his plainness. "You don't like being looked at?" the High Septon said. He put the paper down without looking at it. "And yet you want to be seen." "I want someone else to be seen," Gendry said, surprised at the neatness of the truth in his mouth. "A number of someones. I don't care if men see me at all." "That makes it safer for the others," the High Septon said, "and more dangerous for you." He picked up the petition and read the first few lines. His mouth twitched once. "A mule and then a map," he said to Davos, who coughed embarrassed as if his metaphors had disrobed. The High Septon read further. Quietly, he nodded once to names he recognized, and once again to names he did not but trusted. He set the petition down and looked at the will, long and narrow in dignity. The black seal with the crude stag that could have been a threat or a promise. He held it near the lamp and the wax shone. "This was broken once and put back," he said. "There are many things like that in the city," Davos said evenly, but his eyes were as watchful as Harlan's at a doorway. The High Septon lifted the parchment and smelt it, as men who love books sometimes do. He might have been sure the gods had become nothing but paper and wanted to confirm the rumor before making a doctrine of it. "Ink," he murmured. "See. Smoke." He looked at Davos, a question so large in his eyes and so complicated that only a man who had tried to turn honesty into policy would have recognized it. Davos inclined his head once and did not deny. The High Septon smiled sadly. "Sometimes," he said, "the gods give you the right wine in a dirty cup. The trick is not to smash the cup because your nose is offended." He saw Gendry's confusion and made himself more plain. "If this is what it says, and if the witnesses were who they claimed, and if the law is what older men say it is, we can call men to talk about it. Talk may not save anyone, but it is not nothing. And if your aim is not to put a crown on your head, but to put roofs over others, you will find the faith more generous than when men come to grab what glitters." Gendry nodded. He had not realized until that moment that his shoulders had been lifted near his ears, and they dropped an inch. "My mother told me once," he said, because he did not know how else to answer, "that a cold winter and a full stomach feels like a god's kiss. She never cared what the god's name was. She laughed at men who had time to argue." The High Septon's smile warmed the room. "I knew a woman like that once," he said. "She told me my homilies were pompous and then brought me soup." He touched the sealed will. "I will call men to the Hall of Lamps, not with the drums and trumpets that make lords feel important. Not yet. With a quiet word. We will hear your paper. We will hear your list. We will hear the law argued by men who like such arguments. There will be those who will try to make it a show. I will keep it a hearing. Then we will, perhaps, call more. And so we will build a thing the size of a chair without anyone noticing they have begun to sit." Orwyle preened as if his quill had done this by itself. Ser Harlan did not relax exactly, but allowed his mouth to stop being the thin line a whetstone makes. Davos's shoulders did something that amounted to a sigh so large even his lungs couldn't have handled it. It was his whole history deflating. For a second and then folding neatly for ease of carrying. "And the city?" Gendry asked, unexpectedly. He didn't know why those words had been the ones to come. He thought of Nella with flour on her hair, of Rennie laughing like a bird and then suffocating in a sack, of the child in the doorway with a finger up its nose, of blue shoes. "What will the city do while we argue law?" "Be itself," the High Septon said, with that fond contempt men reserve for places that have shaped them. It will feed from one hand and bite the other and not know why. It will trade in stories and skewer you with them, and then it will claim it always loved you if you get your head above the crowd. In the meantime, feed who you can. Put men without work to tasks that help their pride. Make a room where those you gather can sleep without someone looking at them as if they are a loaf. The faith can help. We will give you brown bread and thin soup and a word delivered at the right ear. We can give you prayers without charge and a few men whose consciences itch and who want a good reason to scratch. We cannot give you safety. We cannot give you what you most need, which is luck. I've always thought luck was a word men used to pretend the gods were listening, Gendry said. That, the High Septon said, is why I like you. He stood. Come back at noon tomorrow. There will be 12 men who think differently about everything and who will, for an hour, pretend they do not. We will say the words correctly. Then the trouble begins. They left the September into air that tasted of cold iron and possibility. Men looked at them the way men look at the center of a thing that has not yet decided to be a fire or a puddle. Ser Harlan leaned in, spoke without moving his lips, a skill as useful in crowd as in court. We are watched. We were born watched, Davos said, without fear or resent. A statement of fact like saying the sky was where it was. The trick is not to do it like a juggler. People find it easier to forgive a man who doesn't seem to be entertaining them. The rest of the day filled itself with errands that mattered more than they seemed. Orwell found 2 novices whose whole lives had been written in margins and who were keen to write in a main text for once. Their zeal worried Gendry, who did things slower. Davos went to a dock and spoke with a man who owed him a favor and came away with nothing but a salt stain on his cloak and a clearer idea of where the favor had gone. Ser Harlan listened in 3 taverns and came back with a list of men who were pretending not to care that the words Great Council had been breathed into the city's ear. Brother Cole arranged for a room in a quiet corner of the September where women could sit who did not want to be stared at by men hungry for a story. Nella sent a boy to say she had 3 old blankets and 1 new that had been paid for twice. If they wanted them, they would be hanging on a line like repentance. Gendry, for his part, did the thing he had always done best. He went back to the forge and made a thing that did not exist the day before. It was only a circlet, iron, ugly. He did not make a crown. He would not make a crown until the mule had been shod and walked a mile without stumbling. He heated the strip and hammered it into a ring that was not a perfect circle, because no head is, and filed off the burrs and rubbed it with oil. He set it on the bench and looked at it as if it might be a joke told at his expense. Then he took up a small punch and stamped into the inside where no one could see. 1 by 1, not letters. He didn't yet trust them, but marks, small and simple. 1 for Maya, 1 for Edric, 1 for Bella, 1 for Rook, 1 for Sana. 5 tiny indentations like stars on a poor man's roof. He would stamp more when the names were certain, not before. He would wear it in private once to make his neck know its weight. Then he would wrap it in cloth and put it away, because no man should go to petition wearing anything that could be mistaken for a demand. Night came with the lazy cruelty it had when the city was tired. In the distance, someone sang about a man who had climbed a tower and found not love but wind. Someone fought in an alley and laughed when he lost. Gendry locked the door and lay down again and did not sleep. When he closed his eyes, he saw names written in Orwell's hand, and the hand of a king he had never known that had not written anything but had held a pen enough to frighten people later. He saw blue shoes, and he saw a mule. At dawn, the bells called men to choose what they would be that day, and it seemed to Gendry that for the first time in his life the choice did not feel like the question of what to make on the anvil, but like the question of what the anvil itself ought to be. He rose and set his tools in order. He washed his hands twice, as if he could scrub from them the stain of doubt. When noon came, the hall of lamps filled slowly, because men who liked to pretend they did not run to hear whispers could not rush. The lamps were lit though the day outside was bright, and their steady soft burn made the chamber feel serious and secret without being dramatic. The High Septon sat where he could not be called a judge and could not be mistaken for a clerk. Sister Lana, a woman with a face like a winter field, took names without asking rank and wrote them in a book no man would be allowed to carry away to show his friends. 12 men sat in the half-circle where they could watch each other and be watched. Lord Yorick Royce of Runestone wore bronze that lied about being older than it was. He sat like a man who knew his ancestors would attend if he didn't perform them properly. Lord Mathis Rowan sat because his knees made him sit. He had a sleepy morality that came alive at certain words and then yawned again. A Celtigar younger than his beard wished gave away his house by a ring with crabs engraved on it that he fiddled in a way that made him seem less pompous and more nervous. Lord Randall Tarley was not there. He sent, instead, a man whose mouth looked like a cut and whose eyes looked like potato dirt. His absence was a presence that made Orwyle mutter a proverb about hounds scent instead of teeth. The witnesses were called not like actors, but like tools. Orwyle read the words that asked for names to be gathered and made whole. The High Septon asked not whether the petitioners were noble, but whether the petition was written by a hand that knew the law's words. Orwyle preened again. Davos spoke as a man who had seen more of men than of paper and gave the reasons why men not born to law should be protected by it. Even so, he did not mention kings. He did not say crown. He said winter, and he said hunger. And he said justice with the tiredness of someone who knew that word had been used both as kindness and as cudgel. Gendry stood at the right time and let the room look at him. He did not lift his chin too high or lower it too much. He kept his hands still. The High Septon called on him by no title. "You are the smith," he said. "I am," Gendry said. "I am a bastard, also." He felt a ripple pass through the room at that. It was not offense. It was satisfaction. The word had been said and could be put down now. If the law can make me lawful, I want it to do so to as many as it can while it has its pen in its hand and not after. If it will not make us lawful, I want it to say so we can stop waiting at its door. I want names kept in a book that won't burn if a man is paid to open an oven. I want beds more than chairs. I want, in short, us alive and counted. He thought of Rennie and her dimples and felt anger try to ruin the speech. He swallowed it like a man swallowing too hot stew and burned his tongue for his trouble, then went on anyway. If something more than that comes of it, it will come because of the law all men made with their mouths, and not because I made it with my hands. Lord Royce nodded, as if something in that had pleased his ancestors. The Celtigar frowned in a way whose interest outmuscled his disdain. Lord Rowan's eyes sharpened, as if he had heard a word he liked among the ones he did not. Then the witnesses came. Tobo Mott was older than Gendry wanted him to be. His hair had fled so much of his head it looked like a surrender. He bowed precisely and named him without ornaments. "This boy forged well under my hand," he said. "He forged a helm that would frighten men from foolishness and invite them to a different kind. He has the visitation's face." The room stirred at that. Some men loved phrases the way others love salted fish, and he corrected himself with humility that made Gendry want, absurdly, to cry. "He looks like his father, which is to say he looks like a name you all know." He told them, without drama, of a woman with blue shoes who had brought the boy to his shop one day and had not known the price of iron. He told them of later, of men with gold wanting a boy and him saying no because craft came before kings. Orwyle wrote quickly. A woman came, old enough for his mother's age to feel like a thing a story would lie about. She had a long face and eyes that had betrayed and been forgiven. Her name had once started with lady. It had ended with a laugh. She spoke of a king who made promises in the dark and forgot them in the morning and laughed when someone reminded him because the morning wanted laughter and not apologies. She named 4 names of girls who'd run to her to hide when their bellies grew and the city's patience shrank. Only one had carried to term. That one had died because milk is not always milk when you pay in hope. Gendry listened and swallowed again and did not let his face become a sermon. A man came in a salt-stained cloak and said only that he had once delivered a boy of 10 to Storm's End because a shadow chased him and that a different kind of shadow chased him back out again. He said the boy had teeth like a colt and a way of looking too long at puddles as if water might surprise him. He said nothing of magic or the reasons why men had once lowered their voices when speaking of Stannis Baratheon or his Red Woman. He did not need to. The room had its own ghosts and did not require the conjuring of outsiders. By the end of the hour, Orwyle's hand had cramped and the lamps seemed to lean in to hear. The High Septon nodded gravely, hands folded, as if he had been tending himself like a small flame to not blow out in a wind. He cleared his throat with an apothecary's cough. "We will call this a matter for more ears," he said. "We will bring men whose names make rooms stand straighter. We will insist on quiet when they want to shout. We will call it what the law calls it: a petition for legitimization of acknowledged natural issue and the gathering of the same into one household under protectorship." He let the ugly words sit and dared them to try to look beautiful. "In the meantime, while the pen looks for its next sex, we will do the other thing. We will gather. Bring me the girl who runs the mountain paths like a goat and see whether Bronze nods at her. Bring me the boy who learned to greet strangers in lists and see whether they will let him be greeted here. Bring me Bella. Bring me any, all. We will stand before men and ask them to nod or shake their heads, and we will not go away when they do the latter." On the steps of the September afterward, men wanted to look at them and did not want to be caught looking. That tension made the air taste of metal and salt. Davos scrubbed a hand over his jaw and laughed as if something had been decided and something else had been forced to wait its turn. "We have a mule," he said. "We have put a counterfeit crown on it and called it harness. Now we must find a road." Ser Harlan glanced toward the street of silk where Trouble went to recruit. "We have enemies," he said. "They will dress their knives in law and then, if that fails, undress them. Do not walk alone." "I never walk alone," Gendry said, honest and not comforting. "I walk with the city." He thought of the iron circlet under its cloth and of the marks inside it. He thought of a woman on a path in the Vale and a boy on a quay in a foreign harbor and a girl in stony September, taller in men's minds than life. He thought of a dead girl with laughter left in her somewhere that felt like a bruise. He thought of blue shoes. The first letter came as if the man who carried it had always been walking toward him and didn't know it. It was sealed with wax the color of crab shell, and inside the crab laughed at him with tiny claws. He opened it without ceremony, because ceremony would have indulged a Celtigar's vanity. It said, in Orwell's gloss later, that his cause was interesting the way a curious disease is, and that law loved interesting diseases because it could test whether its cures were only songs. It said the Celtigar would attend a council and bring a clerk and a man who knew the old words in Valyrian that had once pretended to be more precise than the ones they used now. It said, in the turn of a sentence, that the writer did not have children. Gendry read that twice and felt he understood the rest, and forgave a little. The second letter came by word of mouth from a boy with mountain on his shoes. He said Maya Stone had laughed at a message and then grown sober and then laughed again. He said she had sent back a rope and a bell in a bag and instructions for those unused to climbing. He said, with respect to Orwell's sensibilities, that the letter had been written on bark because paper insulted the truth at high altitudes. Gendry considered that and loved her a little without having met her. The third letter came from Lys. Not a letter, but a man with a scar that had been a duel over cards and a handkerchief that said he had once been a servant and was now practicing at being a messenger. Edric Storm would not write. The man said he preferred to speak. He would not go to King's Landing yet because the sea was napping, and he did not like to arrive when ships were too happy. He would send a boy first to see how wolves looked. The boy had already been sent. The man looked at Gendry and smiled in a way that said he had opinions about wolves. They made a room in the forge's back for sleeping. Nella's blankets came, smelling of yeast and hope. Brother Cole sent Sister Lana with a kettle and a disapproval of men's eating habits. 2 children arrived and were put to work fetching water and moving coal, and the work pleased them because it was work and not begging. Gendry slept less and found out that it is possible to be so tired your thoughts stop moving and you become calm. Davos ate bread with the reverence of a man who had starved and then had enough and knew both were miracles. Ser Harlan grumbled at being civilized and learned not to wipe his knife on a towel Sister Lana valued. Bad men came once in the night. Ser Harlan was already in the doorway. Gendry heard the note in his voice as if he had tuned it in the afternoon. Now? Ready? Not yet. The men had their faces covered as if the cold wanted company. One had a knife that wanted what it wanted too much. The fight was short because Ser Harlan loved economy and because Davos had once loaded cargo in a hurry and remembered what a belaying pin did to kneecaps. Gendry hit one in the ear with a hammer, not because he liked hitting men in ears, but because that is how you stop a man without breaking him entirely. The men fled. They left a smell of cinnamon and clean linen. For every smile there was a warning. For every loaf there was a knife. For every letter, a blank stare. Orwell told them, with relish, of a man who had attempted to write a refutation of their petition and had misused 3 Latin words so badly that any god with a sense of humor would deny him water. Brother Cole told them, with cheer, of a seamstress who had given a girl a room for the night, and in the morning the girl had brought back a coin and a pear with a bite out of it. Davos told him, with weary pride, that his old friend Salador had sent 2 men with stained shirts and the suggestion that a ship could be had if a ship were needed. Davos had said yes to the offer of a ship and no to the offer of stained shirts. Gendry kept his hands busy so that his mind would have less room to go running into walls. He made hinges whose whisper argued morality. He made nails that could keep a roof fast in a night wind. He repaired a pot, and the woman who owned the pot cried because it looked like itself again. He made a small ring of iron and put it on his own finger, and then took it off and put it away because it made him feel like a liar. He tried the ugly circlet on once, in the dark, and it sat his head without asking for it to be bigger or smaller. He took it off and pressed it to the bench and left an oil stain that looked like a moon. On the morning of the second hearing, Lord Randall Tarley came himself, and the room leaned in because he was a man who had made himself into a proverb and men wanted to huddle in its insult. He sat like a man who had no use for chairs and yet used them perfectly. He listened without moving and then spoke, and his words fell to the floor with the weight of stones. He asked Gendry how he could be sure he would not make bastards proud of being bastards if he made them legitimate. Gendry thought about that and said he did not think anyone with sense would be proud of a word that meant someone else made a choice for them before they could walk. He said he wanted them to be proud of something else. Forgery or roof-making or being able to run up a mountain and back. Lord Randall's mouth moved in the neighborhood of a smile, so bitter it could strip rust. He asked Davos whether he would set a man without book learning to judge the words that would govern him. Davos said he would not, and then he said he had once been judged B. Why a lord who had more books than he had honest crusts, and that had not gone well. And the High Septon stopped Lord Randall from replying because it would have gotten into a story about kings that no one needed to hear that day. In the market that afternoon, just as the city had refocused on cabbage and flesh and coin, a boy with mountain dirt on his boots arrived with a rope round his waist and laughed when he saw Gendry because Gendry looked like no one's idea of a hero. He handed him a ribbon tied with a childish knot. A strip of bark dangled. A thumbprint in sap sat on it like a seal. It smelled of clean cold. It said only, in clumsy letters someone had taught a wild girl, "I will come. Bring a bell." The next day a man from Lys came who was too handsome, and the women in the market looked at him as if he had been put there to make them forget the price of onions. He looked at Gendry and smirked and then said, "No," softly, as if pleased to be wrong, and the smirk left and something gentle came in its place. He delivered Edric Storm's words, wrapped in charm and oil. Edric wanted to be wooed, the man said. He wanted there to be a party for him, and he wanted to pretend he had not come for it. Orwell groaned and said he hated boys who made law into theater. Davos sighed and said boys like that sometimes make decent lords in time. Gendry said nothing, because he had never been a boy who had the luxury of flourishes and did not trust them. By the end of a week, 12 names sat on Orwell's page and Gendry's ring held 12 marks, and each felt like both a plank laid and a hole cut. The petition had walk, the council had creak. The city had begun to tell itself a story about him in which he was either a fool or a saint or a half-wit or a threat. That was the city's way. It had no room for misses when a myth could be made. He tried to walk through those stories as if they were fog and found they sometimes clung. He avoided looking at his own reflection when water remembered to be still. His face amused him. He looked like himself and like the man the city had argued about in 1,000 bedrooms, and the combination made strangers soft and strangers cruel. He had never loved or hated his face. It had hung on him without being invited, like an old cloak. Now it was a banner whether he wanted it or not. He tried not to make it a weapon. On a raw morning with fogs low and mean, a woman came to the forge in a cloak that had once been beautiful enough to make other women hate her, and now was patch over patch. She looked at him steadily and smiled in a way that cut 10 years off her face and made plain how pretty she had been. "They called you boy in my kitchen," she said. "The hammer boy. They called him lord. He was a bad lord in a good way. He ate Lou much." Her eyes sparkled as if the memory had been a new loaf and not old crumbs. She leaned on his bench as if this were a kitchen table and she might scold him for dirty elbows. He would be pleased to see his name trying to be used for something other than wine. He would be offended to be gathered. He did not think of his pleasures as needing to be gathered. He thought of them as gifts. Men like gifts that require no ledger. He would be wrong and right at once. "Do you have a name?" Gendry asked. "I have had 3, she said cheerfully. "You can choose which you want. The last one is safe, Miriel. The first 2 are dangerous if said in the wrong room, because in those rooms men are angry that the blue shoes they bought weren't thanks enough. He bought me green," she added with a little pride and less wistfulness than someone else might have had. "And a comb, when my hair was thick." He looked at her and looked away for no reason except dignity, and she laughed at him as if he were a son. "Don't be solemn at me, Gendry," she said. "Serious men make serious mistakes. Come by my house. I have 3 girls and 2 nephews who will stab you if you touch a loaf without paying and who will stab someone else if they call you names. They need a little law and a little work. We will call it charity because that makes the faith happy. We will not call it that to each other because that makes us unhappy." He went. The house smelled of onions and an old perfume that had lingered as long as a story. The girls had the wary grace of alley cats who had been petted and kicked and survived both. He put them to work sort nails and learned more about nails than he had thought he could stand. The nephews were feral and then, suddenly, boys. He told them how to hold a hammer so it didn't bite. When they learned to do it without bruising their thumbs, they looked at him as if he had given them a kingdom. If he forgot for an hour each day that his name was being written in Orwell's ledger and sung in taverns and muttered with contempt in a chair room somewhere, he was more bearable, even to himself. He began to understand that if he were ever to be anything besides a man with a good arm and an inconvenient mother, he would have to learn to divide himself in 3. The smith who knows what iron wants, the man who can sit and listen to the law's endless appetite without falling asleep, and the thing the city insists on making him even when he isn't looking, the symbol. He would have to keep the 3 from killing each other. In the second week, when the wind turned and brought the sea up into the alleys with the smell of storms, a boy with careful hands and careful eyes came to stand at the edge of the forge as if he were measuring whether the room would permit him to exist in it. He wore good boots, the kind you buy when you love walking and also being seen walking. His hair was cut in a style that said someone had encouraged him to be seen and had consequences for those who didn't. His mouth had that look of expectation that dancers get if anyone has ever clapped for them. "You're Gendry," he said, and his voice was trying on certainty without having bought it yet. "I'm Edric." Gendry took him in, the vanity, the boy's earnest eye that wanted to be just, the vanity again, the desire to be recognized without committing to being recognizably useful. He nodded one time. "You are," he said. Edric smiled. He had Robert's teeth in a way that made Gendry's stomach flip, and not in pleasure. "I want to see my name," Edric said. "The way you wrote it." "I don't write," Gendry said. "I ask." Edric took that without insult, a good sign. "I want to help," he said. "I want to stand up and be counted and then, later, stand somewhere else and be more counted. I don't want to end my life on a foreign balcony wondering if I might have been a king if I had only been brave before I learned to be polite." "That is honest," Davos said from the doorway, which made Edric jump because he had not seen him there and because honest sounded like a compliment but might not be. "It's also theater. This is not a stage." Edric flushed and looked at Gendry instead, as if the smith were less likely to scold. "They told me you're not like him," he said, and it was half accusation and half reverence. "I'm not like anyone but myself," Gendry said. "We're making a room big enough for a dozen selves. If you can fit in it without wanting to set fire to the curtains, you're welcome." Edric laughed then, in spite of himself, honest like a cough. "I want to stand next to you when men talk," he said, more quietly, shame peeking through vanity like a shirt through a tear. "I want them to see 2 of us and realize stories are not as simple as they like." Gendry thought of Maya coming down a mountain with a bell and the rope around her waist, of Bella moving through a room men thought they owned and showing them how to carry beer without being carried, of Rook and Sana fetching water until their backs learned a new kind of ache. He thought of being 2, then being 3. He thought of a room at the September where the High Septon had refused to be called judge and had judged anyway. He nodded. "Stand," he said. The third hearing was uglier. Lord Randall came again and brought with him a man who hated bastards like a habit and had made eloquence out of that hatred. He said that legitimizing such would break houses like barrels. He said that if you made a law for one day, men would break it for 100 because it had made them happy to think they could ask anything and perhaps have it. He said justice was a knife and must be handled by men unafraid to cut away rot. He looked at Gendry when he said rot. He never quite said traitor. He said traitor synonyms until the word itself fell into the room like a spark and burned a little spot that the High Septon doused with a glance. Davos spoke then like the sea pushing back an arrogant shore and said that if a law had not protected a child because a lord didn't want his wife to hear about his pleasures, maybe the law needed a little humiliating. He said men who feared law when it was made in rooms without swords had never bothered to fear it when it came at them with steel. He said bandits and kings both hate parchment because it makes their tidy cruelty look foolish. He said too many people had died for men's convenience. It was time someone was inconvenienced for someone's life. He made no friends. He made 2 useful enemies. After, the High Septon called them into the small room again and poured them small ale and set a plate of cheese on the table like a mother. He smiled at Edric in a way that should have been a rebuke and came off as fatherly. He told them that the Great Council would be called. He said it as if he were saying that the harvest would come 2 weeks late. No triumph, only fact. Men who want to think they decide everything will now decide something. He said, "I will keep the lamps lit. You will keep yourselves from becoming theater. They will want you to fall into their stories. Don't. Make your own. They will hate you for it and respect you after." Gendry walked out into the air and felt it bite his lungs and smiled because the bite meant he was breathing something that hadn't already been breathed and spent by a dozen mouths before. He went back to the forge and took out the circlet and set it on the bench and thought of adding a 13th mark inside and then stopped and wrapped it up again. He would wait. It wasn't that he was superstitious. It was that he was learning to wait for heat to be right before striking. That night, while the city laughed at some joke he could not hear and men in chairs wrote to other men in chairs about his impudence, he sat with his back against his anvil and let his head find the comfort he kept there for times like this. Davos slept on the pallet with his mouth open like a boy exhausted from honest play. Edric snored with delicate vanity, as if even his sleep wanted listeners. Ser Harlan did not sleep at all. He stared at the window and not at Gendry and kept his sword across his knees like a lapdog. The forge's heat dwindled. The iron cooled. There is a moment, when metal loses its color, that it looks like it had never been hot, like it had not been capable of being changed. It is a lie. The changes stay. The truth is inside, where it cannot be seen, in the lattice of what holds it, in the memory of what was done to it, in the way it resists or yields when the next blow lands. In the morning, the mule would be led in and had its hoof lifted and a nail would be set and driven and the hoof would hold or split. In the morning, names would be said and others would be unsaid, and someone with a ring would make a face as if the words had a smell. In the morning, blue shoes would be only a story and a dead girl would wait forever at a weir, in a place no one should go and a girl in the veil would test rope with laughing impatience. In the morning, a city would wake and decide to bite the hand that fed it or lick it. In the morning, for the first time in his life, Gendry would sta. ND in a room where men who had never lifted a hammer would ask a hammer what it was for. He closed his eyes knowing sleep wouldn't come. He would teach himself, he thought, not just law or names, or the correct way to address a lord without putting your foot on his pride accidentally. He would teach himself the art of stillness that wasn't surrender. He would hold until the heat was right. He would strike only then. He dreamed of a crown made of horseshoes. He dreamed of nails that held. He dreamed, to his own disgust and shame and reluctant pride, of a king not as a man who sat on a chair, but as a man who stood in a doorway and said no to the night with an ordinary hammer in his hand and meant it, and was believed.